we're back to look at a video that was just around 12 minutes from Sabine Hossenfelder, somebody that has a lot of issues with mainstream physics. And she released a video. The thumbnail says "Stunning Hypocrisy." And the title is "Physicists Are Afraid of Eric Weinstein, and They Should Be." So quite dramatic framing there. And this is Sabine's take on the interaction that Eric had with Sean Carroll on Piers Morgan.
Yeah, you just reminded me with her title there that Sabine does title some of her videos very provocatively. I don't know.
Yes.
Maybe she's keen to get more clicks, but aren't we all?
No. I mean, we're not all doing the thing that's Savine is doing. She's very much kind of captured in the YouTube algorithm. Yeah. And we have previous episodes, should people want to go back, covering Sabine, which like document some of these tendencies. And also there is the YouTube channel Professor Dave. Actually, if you go and look at his earlier videos, the earliest video, he was actually relatively charitable to Sabine, but no longer.
He's been radicalized.
Yeah. So he points out, and we agree with him, that she is like pandering to the anti-science audience on YouTube. She does make videos which are kind of just science commentary. She releases at a rate of like a video a day, right? So there's quite a lot. There's a mix, but her videos that do best tend to be the ones that are commenting on the failure of mainstream physics or this kind of thing, right? So here's the first clip talking about, Sabine's general framing of this.
I watched this recent episode of Eric and Sean Carroll on Piers Morgan and read the comments from all those who piled on afterwards. And boy, was this ugly. I can't believe the fucking hypocrisy of these people. So that's why I finally want to talk about Eric. I've known Eric for almost 20 years. He's a good guy. If you take away one thing from this video, let it be that Sabine said Eric's a good and fairly normal person, in contrast to a lot of others who think it's okay to shit on people they know nothing about. I've seen an enormous amount of hate thrown at Eric that he doesn't deserve.
Oh, yeah. So the important message that she wants to communicate there is that Eric's a great guy. And also that he's extremely normal, which is just like, I think the lady doth protest too much, because Eric is not normal. And Matt, I don't know, did you notice the weird editing there? Where
yes.
She's like, she just suddenly...
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Yeah, I mean, this is something I've noticed with Sabine, that she sort of blows hot and cold. There'll be often like a title to a YouTube video, which is very provocative, scientists are lying to you, whatever. And then there'll be like half the episode will be kind of leaning into, I guess, a very strong anti-institutional, even conspiratorial text. And then she'll flip or vice versa. And she's kind of said it both ways. She has a grumpy personality, which I quite like as far as it goes, but it does seem to lean towards the performative sometimes, right? Like the real anger, like the real venom, or not venom, it's too strong, but the real power in her language tends to come when she's talking in a certain direction.
Well, I think it is venom, but I felt that was like sort of performative, this bit that was, I can't believe the fucking hypocrisy of these people, and then it suddenly goes down in the next sentence. So I imagine she went on for a bit and then cut it out, right? So whatever. The main thing is she's known Eric for 20 years. He's a good guy, and she wants to emphasize the takeaway message from this is that I said Eric is a good and fairly normal person. As per usual, Matt, this thing of I met someone, they're nice to me, that's uber alles in the guru sphere. That's usually the heuristic that people operate by, right? I got on well with them. Sean Carroll is not arguing or criticizing Eric for anything about that. Like that he's
he's not saying that he's not saying he's a bad person. I can't think of anyone more polite and reserved than Sean Carroll. Sean Carroll, made a strong case against Eric. Eric makes an incredibly strong case, as does Sabine, against basically everyone, all of the scientists, except for influencers, people on YouTube. But I guess it's the scientists who are wrong, right? They're who should be ashamed of themselves.
Now, Sabine goes through, like an explainer of sorts, a very brief explainer outlining, the kind of like the general claims being made by Eric's theory of everything, and explains it, to the best of her ability. She does some self-deprecating comments about, her as a stupid girl, like that's as she understands it and whatever. And it's fine as far as it goes, right? Like this is Eric's model. And then this is how that section ends.
So Eric postulates that these two tens are somehow related. Basically, he doubles the gravitational part of Einstein's theory and takes the one version to be the generator of this group that gives you something like SO10. Devils in the details. By this I mean that, in all fairness, Eric's idea is a bit sketchy. But honestly, I don't doubt that with some effort you can somehow make the maths work out. So this is roughly what Eric's working on, I believe. It's all fairly unremarkable, really. The mathematics is pretty close to what physicists are using already, and it's totally in line with all the other nonsense that physicists in the foundations now work on. But for reasons I don't quite understand. A lot of people find this all very interesting, which is how Eric ended up on Piers Morgan with Sean Carroll. And this happened.
So I don't like that framing, right? Because Eric's theory is not just like a normal theoretical physics model, right? It's lacking the core components that would make it useful. And you can make criticisms of other theories and models that, lack empirical validation and whatnot, but it's just not the case that it's exactly comparable to other things. I get that Sabine wants to argue this, right? And she has a very critical view of that. And that is also not why Eric is on Piers Morgan, right? Eric is on Piers Morgan because he is a online gadfly / pundit who often like rails against science and stuff, right? He's an anti-science contrarian that worked for Thiel. So it's not like Chris Langan or someone being invited on to debate Sean Carroll, right? It is somebody who was like a big figure in the IDW and all that kind of stuff. So Sabine's framing that, I don't know why people find this interesting, but that's not why Eric gets invited on Rogan or
no.
Piers
And
Morgan.
her framing is also one as to people have a problem with Eric. He's just got a physics theory. He's just a guy with a physics theory. Aren't you allowed to have a physics theory? And of course, no, that's not why Eric gets into hot water. He has theories about UFOs. He makes grand claims about faster than light space travel, and that his ideas are too dangerous, too powerful to be revealed to the rest of the world. We've covered him in detail. I'm not going to enumerate that, but there's a lot more to him than just this sketchy theory. But the other thing, Chris, is that, did you notice, like, what she's saying there is kind of can be read in two ways. And I know that Eric responded badly to her defense online. And I kind of see why, because she's kind of, what's the word? She's negging him a little bit. Like, she's saying, he's got a theory, and I'm sure with, it's kind of nonsense, but so are all the physics theories at the moment. Like, the maths is, it's a bit sketchy, but I'm sure with some work it could be turned into something. I mean, that's kind of weak praise, especially to someone like Eric who, makes such strong claims about his theory.
Well, yes, you're going to hear a bit more because she does basically endorse Sean Carroll's critiques. And like, even though the takeaway message from this, as you'll hear, is like a strong defense of Eric online was like, he posted his Lagrangian, and when Sabine responded saying, not sure how to say this, but this is not what physicists suspect when they say Lagrangian. And Eric responded, saying he's bewildered and providing like a long equation and whatnot. So for Eric, that just shows the fragile ego, right? And that's an illustration of what people are criticizing. But Eric, we've covered Eric in depth, and Sabine says, people don't really know Eric. We know Eric. We know his conspiracy theories. We've spent our time in the Eric content mines.
That's right.
And,
no one can accuse us.
Yeah, of not paying enough attention to what he's saying. So that critique falls, but it's an illustration of his fragile ego, that even though this is a defense of him, that it's not enough, right? Like he still has to complain that he's not being given enough credit. So accidentally she illustrated the issue. But anyway, let's hear her go on. So she's going to talk about Sean Carroll directly now and the criticisms he raises.
I think one has to give credits to Sean that he agreed to do this, because the vast majority of physicists would have chickened out. And honestly, Sean did a pretty good job. Yes, Eric's work is far from complete. Yes, he doesn't have a Lagrangian, and he hasn't actually solved any problem, and he hasn't explained how anomaly cancellation works, and other than some hand-wavy, there ought to be new particles somewhere, he doesn't have tangible predictions. But then, Eric's only one person who wrote up some notes. If he had wasted some millions of tax money on hiring postdocs and writing papers about it, then he could have easily papered over these shortcomings, just like everyone else in that area.
This is what I mean about Sabine blowing hot and cold. It's quite interesting. She's defending Eric, but only on the grounds that he hasn't wasted as much resources with his nonsense as other theoretical physicists. I mean, she's well known for she doesn't like basically the state of theoretical physics. She thinks everything's a waste of time, and all of these particle colliders is a big waste of money. I'm never quite clear what she thinks physicists ought to be doing. I'm sure she's explained at some point, but it is a weak defense, and it is, she said she conceded most of the points that Sean Carroll made in criticism of Eric. And yet the conclusion is, fuck you, Sean Carroll. Eric's fantastic.
Oh, yeah. So you heard her gearing up there. Like, so, she's saying, yes, he does this. Yes, it's like that. And also that point about but he hasn't wasted money or time of postdocs, not because Eric doesn't want to. Like, Eric constantly talks about how everybody should be focusing on his theory and we'd be traveling faster in life.
He's wearing his suit and waiting for the call so he can be put in charge of the department somewhere.
Yeah, her point there only stands because people have expressed no interest in a half-formulated theory. But, you heard her kind of acknowledging the criticism and the tone of voice. But as she moved into attacking mainstream physics, she gets more animated, right? And so it continues. Listen to this.
And this is why this pisses me off so much. Sean totally knows that most of his colleagues work on similarly flaky stuff. It's just been covered up by more working hours. The literature's full of papers without proper predictions, without Lagrangians, ill-defined operators, or problems that will be solved in some future work that never comes. Sean knows that. Everyone in the damn field knows that. But normally, no one's saying anything about it because they're all tied up in the same scam. Unless the person who comes up with the idea is Eric Weinstein, in which case it's suddenly hugely offensive and everyone starts yelling. Well, Sean, why don't you talk for a little bit about all these supposed ADS-CFT predictions for condensed matter, this or that, which were supposed to revolutionize superconductivity? Whatever happened to that? And just exactly how is string theory defined anyway? Did they actually ever solve the problem of quantum gravity? Did they ever prove it's finite? What Calabi-Yau manifold are we talking about again? Or how about loop quantum gravity? Do they have a well-defined Hamiltonian? Where is the classical limit? And these are areas in which thousands of people have spent decades and billions of dollars. Why aren't you talking about this rather than crapping on Eric, who's one single person and at least trying to do something new?
So that's a highlight that Sabine thinks, she's kind of in the frame of Peter Thiel and Eric Weinstein about there's been no progress. It's all stalled for 20 or 30 years. Everybody's spinning their wheels, wasting their time. So she's Sean Carroll knows this, right? He agrees that there's all, and yes, there will be in any field, there's going to be low quality papers. There's going to be like theoretical claims which outpace the level of evidence, and people with pet theories, and all that is true. She's right that those kind of things exist, and that there are, still long-term problems with established theories and things which people are working on. But it's that false equivalence where she's kind of arguing that, well, it's just the same. Like it's all as hand-wavy and silly. And that's Sabine's assessment. That's not Sean Carroll's assessment, right? She's acting like he knows that. He's refusing to acknowledge everybody's in on this scam. And scientists keep saying to Sabine whenever this kind of, debate comes up or they're responding, that's not their understanding of their field. That's not the way they think of string theorists. Sean talked about string theory in the conversation with Eric. So Sabine's presentation of it is everybody understands that there's like a scam at the heart of physics, and they're all ignoring it because it's how they get money and whatnot. And that's just a very conspiratorial, anti-science contrarian point of view. So yeah,
exactly. And it may well be way above your and my pay grade to assess the degree to which various physics theories have been fleshed out. And we all know that they haven't, got a grand unified theory of everything. Bad physicists, you haven't figured it out yet. Hurry up, get it done. Why don't you? But there has been a lot of progress.
There has been a lot of progress, but just to be clear, Matt, she is arguing that like in all her content and in this and whatever, that like the focus on the unified theory is a waste of time. That's one of her points, is why should you even bother attempting to do that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of physicists doing other things too, right? There's a heap of topics. And also keep in mind that Sabine has extended this critique from physics to the rest of
all of science. That's right. I forgot about that. But yes,
it's not just theoretical physics. It's all of physics and it's all of science. That's right.
Yeah,
so,
she does.
Well, look, if the whole thing's a scam, then I guess it'll, it makes sense from her point of view, right? Yes, Eric Weinstein's got nothing, but neither does anyone else. But that's, as you said, her framing, her understanding, not one that the vast majority of scientists or physicists have.
Yeah, and this is also like when people like Professor Dave and others point out that she appeals to an anti-science contrarian audience, it's because of stuff like this, where she basically presents it that scientists are all involved in a conspiracy to do nothing for their entire careers because they just want to get grant money and do things like that. And
Chris, the other thing wrong with her framing is that this nice man, Eric Weinstein, has very politely and, on his own wicket, been putting together his own little theory and has very politely, humbly submitted it for people's consideration. And then Sean Carroll and everyone else is thrown into
big
a rage.
Meanies.
She was making up that they're yelling. Sean Carroll wasn't yelling. He was not yelling in that interview. His tone was completely relaxed, in contrast to the tone of Eric Weinstein and Sabine herself, right there.
Yeah, and Eric, made personal attacks and so on. And this wasn't lost to the majority of people who watched that video. Like, if you look at the comments under it, Sabine's takeaway that poor Eric was, unfairly treated by Sean Carroll. That is not the take in the majority, even of Piers Morgan's
poor Eric
audience.
Has been smeared, Chris. But in fact, people will recall from that interview, quite the opposite. Sean did not smear Eric. Eric smeared Sean. Eric came prepared with a list of quite infantile personal digs
dives
on Sean's career. Absolutely absurd stuff. But none of that registered with Sabine.
Yeah. And Sean kept it to the paper, right? But in any case, so let's hear more of Sabine's framing.
They say that they want people to think outside the box. But if someone actually does it, they're like, nah, not this way. You don't talk like us. You don't walk like us. We don't like the people you play with. Therefore, we'll not look at your ideas. This is the sorry state of theoretical physics now. And then you get all these people piling onto each hate parade. The groupthink is so thick. Like, they all think it's fine to hate on Eric because they expect their colleagues to cheer on them for doing so. And those who think that maybe Eric's idea isn't so bad keep their mouth shut.
The groupthink, Matt. Groupthink is a big problem.
And also the guilt by association. They've condemned Eric because he's hanging around the wrong people.
Oh,
They're,
yes.
they're,
Yeah.
they're actually probably secretly quite interested in these exciting ideas in Eric's paper, although she kind of undermines that at the beginning, but they're too afraid to because, I mean, I don't think it's like that meme from Mad Men, like that I don't think about you at all meme. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I don't think the vast majority of physicists, like a couple who have some interest in public discourse-y type stuff have looked into his theories, but the vast majority of them have not. Yet they're to blame for that as well, too, I think. Like, they're sort of damned if they do, damned if they don't. If they point out that there's nothing here, which is what Sabine said, then they're evil because they're just hating on him. A poor guy is just doing his best. And if they ignore it, it's because they're too close-minded and they're afraid of new ideas. So I don't know. I see Sabine shoehorning this silly little episode into her general anti-science worldview.
Worth pointing out that Tim Nguyen and Thiel, right, the pseudonym for Tim's co-author, they wrote a technical rebuttal to Eric's geometric unity theory, such as it existed at the time. Sabine hosted that on her blog at the time. She promoted it, right? And she kind of pointed out that Eric wasn't engaging with this, technical treatment of his paper.
Yes.
She was critical of Eric for that. But suddenly now it's the physics community who are to blame. And worth noting that after this episode came out, Tim Nguyen on Twitter made some posts at Sabine, like kind of pointing out the rather hypocritical nature of her, strong switching stance. She went on to block him and she removed the article from her blog, right? So I think that's worth noting. I mean, she can put on her blog or whatever she wants, but she shouldn't be acting like the groupthink here. I mean, I'll just play another clip to highlight it. So this is a little bit later. She's talking about, people that have treated Eric's theory reasonably and whatnot. And listen to this.
Then there's Brian Keating, who deserves credit for not chickening out and for standing with Eric, even though that made people crap on Brian too. Then there's Kurt Jaimungo, who courageously published a very long video about Eric's theory and also interviewed Eric, which led to this following exchange.
I haven't seen such novel ideas from a single person, ever. And I don't know if anyone else will tell you this, but what you've done is remarkable, man.
I don't even know how to be with that, to be honest. Look, thank you.
And again, I saw people jump on Kurt and criticizing him just for talking to Eric. But, Kurt is right. It's remarkable. Eric's ideas as remarkable as the ideas of thousands of other people, each of whom has spent years and years of their life on it and whom you've never heard anything about.
So the groupthink point, Matt, here, I just want to make out praising Brian Keating, cheering on Kurt Jaimungo, and this is a video in defense of Eric Weinstein. That seems to be playing to a particular crowd, Savine. And normally, given, her rather critical, grumpy attitude, this kind of fawning praise directed at someone, it wouldn't normally be highlighted as like a positive feature, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've never seen her elsewhere praise people for, saying you're such a great, insightful person. So this feels very much like playing to a particular in-group that you want to cultivate connections with, perhaps.
And it's particularly surreal given that Sabine Hossenfelder knows what proper scientific rigor is and collegial criticism looks like and how theories, proposals, ideas get handled. And they get handled roughly because that is the culture of robust inquiry. Contrast that with Kurt Jaimungo's response there, which she basically endorses. So this is a group that just pats each other on the back, supports each other. And these are all influencers. These are YouTube influences. And Kurchai Mungal, remember, this is the guy who what's the name of the guy that is
Chris Langan. He made
Chris-
a long video talking about how remarkable Chris Langan, the 200 IQ guy that believes that like his mathematical stuff proves God exists, the afterlife exists, the UFOs are controlling the US government, blah, 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 blah. So I guess Sabine should find that also like extremely appealing and praiseworthy, right? Because he did a deep dive on that.
I just, again, notice Sabine's sort of double phrasing there, which is that, and he's right, Eric's theory is remarkable. It's as remarkable as all the other theories, which she says are absolute nonsense. So you can read what she says two ways. I just suspect that's deliberate. That's all.
Well, I just noticed, Matt, when I looked, I was looking for Sabine's reply to Eric on Twitter. And I saw that Bryan Johnson was writing this big thing about his, Blueprint, the company where he sells his supplements. And he was talking about he's being criticized for grifting, but it's not about that. He wants to give up the company, but he's decided to create like a new company where he combines supplements and like planning, don't die activities and whatever. So he wrote this big, long, indulgent thing about, how he's being attacked, how he's been accused of being a grifter and it's not fair. And he was going to step back from selling Blueprint because he doesn't need to sell it anyway. But now he's decided this, anyway, it's like a rebranding thing. But this is the Bryan Johnson, the, pseudoscientific don't die guy. Sabine responded to that saying, "I'm sorry to hear about the haters. I think you're doing the right thing. Don't let it get to you." So Savine is constantly online kind of cheering on these contrarian figures in the influencer, Andrew Huberman, Eric Weinstein, Kurchai Mungal space. And there's a lot of pseudoscience there. There's a lot of pseudoscience in Bryan Johnson. Just for example, Bryan Johnson said that he regretted getting the vaccines because he didn't know, about the dangers that they posed and whatnot there. So she is condemning people for groupthink and playing to particular in-groups and stuff, but she never addresses her own in-group online and the incentives there. We've talked about it before. She complains about all the incentives in science, and she doesn't discuss the incentives on YouTube, which reward her for taking these kind of stances. Right?
And at this point, it's totally clear to me that these incentives are absolutely at play. When we first covered Sabine, I really wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt because even though there was some troubling signs there, she absolutely can and has produced, very decent, very good, entertaining explainers on scientific topics. But unfortunately, the algorithm rewards this other stuff that Kurchai Mungal and Brian Keating and Eric Weinstein does much, much more than that kind of boring stuff. And I see a lot of other science popularizers, science educational channels out there, including physics ones, that are very, very good, very, very worthy, in my opinion. Some of them are over my head because they're hard to understand. Some of them are, at all different levels. They're doing great work, but they don't lean into this conspiratorial, anti-institutional, contrarian influencer thing. They're nowhere near as successful. And we've seen this pattern with the anti-vax nurse doctor person. What was his name again, Chris?
John Campbell,
thank you. He was making very laudable, sort of, but yet boring YouTube explainers about nursing and basic biological, physiological stuff. Then COVID came along. The incentives are there and they can create a massive change in people's behavior because when the clicks and the revenue stream is rolling in there and this is their job, this is their main source of income, I'm sympathetic even to that, right? But the negative effects are also really obvious.
Well, yeah, though I do think there's also something about the vulnerability of people that go down that rabbit hole. For example, John Campbell, he was producing useful information at the start of the pandemic, but he also had various comments which suggested that he was quite sympathetic to creationism, right? So there often are these signs when you go back and look that the people have these issues and they aren't things that just suddenly emerge from nowhere, right? There are bad habits in the way that people are responding to things. And then in particular, if you happen to be somebody that likes attention too much. I think it's a particular vulnerability. Now, there's a part, Matt, where Sabine references Professor Dave, but doesn't mention him by name. And I think it's worth listening to. So listen to this.
Like with this recent episode about Perimeter Institute. In his Morgan appearance, Eric said vaguely he's been visiting some physics institute and giving a talk. Someone leaked later that this was Perimeter Institute and spread a rumor that they didn't want to be associated with him and that they made a deal that Eric would donate money in return. This is all bullshit, and if they'd stopped and thought for a second, they'd have known it's bullshit. This just isn't how seminar invitations work. Also, let me tell you that when I give talks, I frequently do not mention publicly where I'm going for reasons. I also know that Eric's been giving a bunch of physics lectures in the past years about which you find nothing online, presumably also for reasons. The story from Perimeter Institute is, to my understanding, that the person who invited him feared for their career. This tells you how sick this entire community is, that people are afraid to do as much as express interest in a new theory.
So you got the ramp up of rhetoric there. I doubt, Savine, that the person who invited Eric is like in danger of losing their career over the invitation. And I will say, Matt, that someone on our Patreon who has connections with the Perimeter Institute, I haven't independently validated it, but it sounds reasonable. They mentioned that Eric was invited to the Perimeter Institute, but he wasn't invited to give a talk. He was attending a conference that was part of a 25th year anniversary celebration of the Institute. He did have a 4 to 5 hour informal talk with masters and some PhD students, right, into the evening of the event. So he was there, was invited and so on. So the one bit that I think Sabine is right to kind of call out here is Professor Dave implied that, the Perimeter Institute, they were trying to attract funding from Eric, and that's why they invited him to give this talk in secret, right? They wanted him to, and that didn't ring true to me. I didn't see good evidence for that. And Sabine here is using that to say that's not how it works, right? She has a legitimate critique there.
Yes.
But that was not the only criticism about the way that Eric presents things. But this is so we said at the time, if you make these kind of accusations, this is the stuff that people will jump onto. Or Kurt Jaimungal being paid to make the video about Eric, which is something Professor Dave said as well, right? Like, I would expect that either Kurt or Eric will raise that at some point in the future to undermine, the other criticisms.
Yeah, I think the lesson here is to don't get ahead of your skis. It's best not to speculate about things like that when you don't know that it's true. Like you said, it's pretty implausible on the face of it that they would invited him because they were hoping to, it was a gateway to some sort of funding. Eric isn't worth that kind of money, and it just seems unlikely, right? And unless you know that's true, then don't claim it.
Has he ever done that?
No, he's never done that as far as I know. So, and when you get something wrong and get ahead of your skis like that, then of course you may make 10 different criticisms, but if you make one that is wrong, demonstrably wrong, then the best way to defend yourself is to ignore the other 9 and jump on that one and make as much out of it as you can. A little bit like Sabine was starting to do there at the end, herself getting a bit over head of a ski, saying that they kept it a secret because they'd lose their jobs if they'd found out, and people had found out. Like, everyone who attended would know, so it's not like a big secret, right?
I know. They probably just didn't want it to be, like a big deal for the center, right? It didn't want to be involved in the culture war. And just to mention, Matt, for example, there is a person associated with the Perimeter Institute, research faculty, Lee Smolin, who has appeared on various videos with Eric on Brian Keating's channel. So I don't know, but it's perfectly plausible that that's the person that invited them.
I read a book by Lee Smolin once, I think. Yeah, I did. I remember it's very speculative kind of physics, right? So yeah, I could quite well believe. So this is contrary to the other thing too, right? That
people risk their careers. by
like
talking to Eric or...
It's a massively broad church. There are so many people doing good work, doing bad work, doing speculative work, doing conservative work. There are people that are into crazy alternative theories. There are people who aren't. I think Lee Smolin is one of the ones that's more on the spectrum of quirky out there stuff. And, that's fine. And again, there's nothing wrong with Eric Weinstein independently having a bit of an out there theory. But the reason why he comes flack is not because of that. It's because of the extraordinary claims and how much he rests upon what is, as Sabine says herself, a pretty weak, half-finished piece of work that is the only thing, as far as we can tell, he's really ever produced over the last 30 years or so. So it's the grandiose claims that he makes about himself and about institutions and the state of science generally that is what attracts the attention.
Yes, yeah. And, lest we forget, Eric has consistently claimed that various people, he strongly attacks people that are still alive in physics, right? Presents them as like evil gatekeepers and regularly claims that he invented very influential theories before other people, like the Yang-Mills equation and so on.
Yeah.
Right? And Sabine just ignores
that.
She just treats it like he's just someone developing ideas. Why are you all picking on him? And it's like, if Eric wasn't constantly attacking physicists, constantly attacking scientists and alleging conspiracies, physicists wouldn't be talking about Eric. In general, they're not, right?
They're not. That's right. They're talking about him very little. A couple of them, Tim Nguyen and Sean Carroll, because they have some interest in the public discourse, have given him the credit of actually taking a look and having a go. But the vast majority are not attacking Eric. Quite the contrary. Eric is spending his entire career attacking all of them, both collectively and individually. So it's the opposite of Sabine's framing.
Also, the individual that she hosted, that we interviewed, Tim Nguyen, you do recall that Eric, presented online, made some accusations that suggested that he was misogynistic and like potentially attacking his family. He also named him Itty Bitty Balls Timmy, right, online. So like, as you say, it is absolutely the opposite in terms of who is the one bringing the heat and making it about, personal vendettas. We know that's the Weinstein brothers' modus operandum, but whatever. So now, Matt, I do have two final clips here just to round things off, and I think these are important. So one is from an episode on Brian Keating's channel where Sabine was with Eric and Lee Smolin. It was about theories of everything and whatnot. And there was this exchange, right? People clipped this online to show like the hypocrisy in her recent position.
Well, first, maybe let me make a comment about what Eric just said. You complained that there has not been any substantive discussion about geometric unity. I think that's because no one has any idea what you're talking about in the first place. I think you're severely underestimating the communication problem. And you have to work much, much harder on that. And yeah, I watched your lecture, and I think that I'm among the 500,000 people who watched your video. I'm probably one of those who have a pretty good starting point in understanding what you're even talking about. And even I only have a very vague idea what you're even up to.
That's been basically, I think, expressing what is very similar to Tim Nguyen, and other physicists have looked at it saying, look, it doesn't seem to do much here. It's all very vague. Don't really understand what you're trying to do here.
Yes. And, a lot of a harsher tone there, right? She sounds much more aggressive than Sean Carroll, actually, in that exchange. But the tone has somewhat changed. Now, the thing that Sabine ends up suggesting, right, to finish this video is the following.
In any case, I think what's really happening here is that a lot of people who work in the foundations of physics are very afraid that Eric is exposing how rotten their entire field is. This is why they're trying hard to discredit him. But the truth is that Eric's idea isn't any better or worse than all the other crap they're working on. The only difference is that he hasn't wasted as much of your tax money on it. That's it for today. No, there's no sponsor on this video because I don't want to be accused of monetizing a friendship, but please check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching.
So, Chris, they are afraid of Eric Weinstein. They need to take him down. His ideas are too threatening. He's going to expose the whole corrupt structure of academia. I mean, who's this they? Is it Sean Carroll?
I mean, from the title of the video.
But who are the physicists that are trying to take down Eric Weinstein? It's Sean Carroll and Tim Nguyen, because I'm not aware of.
It's probably them or anybody that's made a disparaging. But like you say, this is just her slotting in Eric into her grand narrative, right?
Yeah.
She's just using him as a kind of totemic figure to say physics is doing nothing useful. And Eric is calling it out, and that's why they're attacking him. And no, that's not why physicists are critical of Eric Weinstein. It's not that he's revealing their grift. It's that, like she said, there's just nothing there, right? Like, and she wants to draw an equivalence between Eric's theory and all the other stuff in physics, but that's really just hand-waving kind of very subjective, shall we say, assessment of the quality, because, you know, even I understand Eric has just put lots of question mark into his paper, such that other physicists who've commented on it, like the guy that was on Professor Dave Christian Furco that was talking about it, were, you know, astonished at how little there was there. So is Christian Furco also part of this, you know, secret cabal? Because he seemed to me just to be like a postdoc that
has an interest. And in the case of Tim Nguyen, he did his doctorate on a similar area. One of the, so he's a geek, and it's a topic he knows something about. He's better qualified to comment on it than even a lot of physicists. So it could be that rather than these, just like three people, rather than acting point for a grand institutional thing to take Eric down, maybe they just had the same reaction to Eric's little paper that Sabine herself had, right? Because that's what it sounds like to me. That's the more innocent explanation. But of course, that's not exciting and does not fit into Sabine's positioning out there at the moment.
No, it's tempting to highlight, the clip of Sabine being like argumentative and harsh to Eric and say, well, look how much has changed. And I do think there is absolutely something to the fact that Sabine over time has become more hyperbolic and more clickbaity and more appealing to people like Bryan Johnson and Kurt Mungle and all this kind of thing. I don't think she would have done that before. So I'm not saying she's in the exact same position she was. But I will say, I went back because I knew Sabine had done other videos about Eric and stuff previously. And I found a video from 5 years ago where she talked about Eric and Garrett Lisi and some other people with theories of everything, right? And she did express rather similar sentiments. And I think it's worth playing it just to make that point, right? So listen to this. This is a video from 5 years ago, right, at the end of it.
Having said that, what do you think I think about Lisi's and Weinstein's and Wolfram's attempts at the theory of everything? Well, scientific history teaches us that their method of guessing some pretty piece of math and hoping it's useful for something is extremely unpromising. It is not impossible it works, but it is almost certainly a waste of time. And I have looked closely enough at Lisi's and Weinstein's and Wolfram's and many other people's theories of everything to be able to tell you that they have not convincingly solved any actual problem in the existing fundamental theories. And I'm not interested enough to look any closer because I don't also want to waste my time. But I don't like commenting on individual people's theories of everything. I don't like it because it strikes me as deeply unfair. These are mostly researchers working alone or in small groups. They are very dedicated to their pursuit and they work incredibly hard on it. They're mostly not paid by tax money, so it's really their private thing, and who am I to judge them? Also, many of you evidently find it entertaining to have geniuses with their theories of everything around. That's all fine with me. I get a problem if theories that, despite having turned out to be useless, grow to large tax-paid research programs that employ thousands of people, as it has happened with string theory and supersymmetry and grand unification. That creates a problem because it eats up resources and can entirely stall progress, which is what has happened in the foundations of physics. People like Lacey and Weinstein and Wolfram at least remind us that the big programs are not the only thing you can do with math. So odd as it sounds, while I don't think their specific research avenue is any more promising than string theory, I'm glad they do it anyway. Indeed, physics can need more people like them who have the courage to go their own way, no matter how difficult.
Yeah, so it's been a consistent view of hers for a long time. Very much dislikes that these paradigms like string theory have gotten so much attention. I think I basically agree with a large amount of that, Chris, right? Because like let 1,000 flowers bloom, theoretical work like a pencil and a paper and a computer, it's quite cheap. So why on earth shouldn't people? I've tried to understand. Oh, what's his name?
Wolfram.
The guy Wolfram who created Mathematica. I've tried to understand his thing, on a basic kind of level. It seems really out there and crazy, way above my pay grade to understand. I mean, all power to him. Like no one's got a problem with someone like him looking into this, just like no one's got a problem with Eric Weinstein as well.
Yeah, so it is that point that like she is correct that there's not an issue with people pursuing their own theories of everything or whatever, like, but there also is a very well-known issue that there are a lot of people who believe that they've developed new theories that would revolutionize physics or biology or whatnot, that they are essentially Einsteins that are going unrecognized, right? And that's the issue, is that those people, it's not just that they think that, it's often that they attack others, they attack scientists for not recognizing their, revolutionary theories and so on. And she just ignores all of that aspect of it. Like all of the stuff that Eric has done to attack institutions, to promote people that are attacking institutions, or just the personal self-aggrandizing victim narratives that he wallows in. So if the criticism is, should Eric be allowed to develop his own theory and like make big claims for it? Like you can do whatever you want, right? Nobody's saying, no, he can't do that. The issue is like all the other stuff around it, and she just doesn't address that. But I do think it's notable that the position that she was presented as like having just developed is actually the same sentiment that she was saying, many years ago. So like, again, I don't think it's that she hasn't gone more down the rabbit hole towards anti-science pandering. But I think that, just like I said previously with other people, there are these positions that people have that make them somewhat vulnerable to, going farther down that line. And I think her view that essentially all of physics is corrupt, it's all moribund, nothing useful is happening there or has been happening for decades. She fundamentally agrees with Eric, right? So she's very sympathetic. And now she happens to be a lot more sympathetic to a whole bunch of fairly anti-scientific contrarians that are active on YouTube. And they also happen to agree with her about, the state of physics and whatnot. And I think it'll get worse. It'll get worse like this because the positive reinforcement goes that way. But it is still worth, I think, for people to go and do these kind of false positives. Because when I saw the video of her being, like apparently fairly hypocritical, I was then like, okay, that's quite satisfying to play. But I knew she talked about Eric. So I was like, well, what did she say before? And went and checked, and then found this clip, which I think is less satisfying, but it's worth doing those kind of checks rather than just satisfying dunks. So you can do both, you can play both like we do.
But isn't there quite a bit of consistency with all of those takes over the years from Sabine about Eric? Because in all of them, she makes it pretty clear that she doesn't think much of Eric's attempt.
She doesn't like theories of everything.
No, she doesn't like his.
Eric's theories. Yeah.
That's right. That was kind of said at every point. But just like you said, at all points in time too, she does have a big problem with mainstream science, especially physics. And so that makes her sympathetic. And I suppose also being a online influencer person, that is her job now. She moves in the same waters as Brian Keating, Kurt Mongol, even Chris Langham,
Bryan Johnson.
Bryan Johnson, and Eric Weinstein. So these are her people.
The last thing I'll say, she says at various times in this, and she says it in other things, that she doesn't spend much time looking at people's content. She doesn't watch things. She doesn't, like, this is this very common thing where people are like, I haven't looked into Eric, what he said or whatever, but he's been very nice to me. And so there's just like this thing that people do online. They take a very defensive stance, but they actually don't know anything about the content, or at least they can retreat to that if they're pressed. So like, if we were to show Sabine in some venue a whole bunch of stuff that Eric said, that is promoting conspiracies or strongly attacking people, she would probably say, well, I don't know about any of that. I haven't looked into it. And it's just a very useful thing to be like, all I care about is the person was nice to me, and that's the main thing I'm basing this on. They're nice to me, and I don't like mainstream physicists, and that's quite convenient.
Yeah, it's also convenient to shift between those two positions, where on one hand, someone like Sabine or Eric, for that matter, many of them, incredibly critical of mainstream physics, incredibly critical of stuff like string theory, multiverse theory, what you name it, right? Really strong. And Eric goes as far as to be like really accusing individual people of rampant corruption and conspiracies and all of that stuff. But criticize Eric, right? It's like he's just a guy doing his best. He's working on his theory. How dare you? It doesn't matter how politely one criticizes him. Tim Nguyen, when he came on our show, and Sean Carroll, very polite about it, very professional. So it seems everything can be criticized except these guys. Yeah.
I wonder why.
Anyway, I wonder why. I'm not liking this little kernel of sort of physics contrarians that is developing. I don't think they produce good stuff. Kurt Jomongel's theories of everything is not something anyone who is serious should be holding up as a great forum of scientific inquiry and debate. And on the other hand, there is heaps of physics content, educational, popular science content out there that is very worthwhile. Whole bunch of just normal everyday people you've probably never heard of, right? Who are not self-promoting, narcissistic, grievance mongering people like this. So, and Sabine, when she does good work, is like those people, but she plays in these waters too, sadly. Yeah. So anyway, go out and find the good content, people. Enjoy it.
You remember the BOD man, Dan Richards, the debunking guy, the one that hates Flint Dibble and is like a bit of a horrible character?
Oh, yes. Yes, yeah. He's definitely one of these weird internet people.
He is a weird internet person in many respects. But the thing that impressed me is that he released a video recently, Eric Weinstein's theory, real physicist versus pseudo poser. But it's not directly about Eric. It's actually about Sabine's video about Eric. So Dan Richards is like kind of taking Sabine's criticism to validate his view that, physicists are all liars and the scientific community is like refusing to acknowledge, out of the box thinkers and whatnot. So this is like the terrible people on the internet always manage to find each other. And it does speak to the point that Professor Dave and others have made, that she feeds into these anti-science channels and communities by producing these kind of videos. So that's a nice crossover.
Yeah. So just remind me. So he was the Flint Dibble hater.
Yes.
Big fan of pseudo-archaeology and what's his name?
Graham Hancock.
Graham Hancock. Yeah, and produced some pretty nasty attack material.
Yeah, and then encourage people to target Flint at his work and all this kind of thing. Yeah, he's a bad guy.
A bad guy and also, delusional. These things often go together. Okay, so now he's a big fan of Sabine because she's having a go at institutional physicists. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So just, more evidence in the column for the impact that Sabine is having on the discourse. Those are the kind of things that might make you notice, what you're up to. So
yeah, I think so too. Like if people were like relying on us to do stuff that was objectively really quite bad, and we're also doing other bad things in a similar tangent, then I would stop and think, hang on, is there what are we doing? This is not who we want to be appealing to.
Well, but the thing with Sabine, I've noticed this as well. You can tell quite a lot on occasion by the way that people interact with the feedback they receive. And when Sabine posts anything on Twitter, on YouTube, she will like all of the comments, which are, you know, kind of praising her or talking about the evil establishment or whatever. And any of the ones that give pushback or critical commentary, she just ignores. So she'll, you know, it shows that what she wants to encourage and what she likes and what she does not like. So I think she does know what she is cultivating.
Yeah. That's right. Because the comments usually are like, however strong the OP's stance is, Sabine in this case, the comments are generally, they take it further. You know what I mean? They connect the dots and they say the quiet bit out loud, that kind of thing. And they're generally a bit more extreme. And then so you can go through and like or encourage or retweet those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But, you know, like you're not saying it. It's just, you know what I mean? But, you know, you've incited that. And Eric Weinstein and Brett do that a lot too, which is, especially Eric. He'll make a vague... People. Yeah, lab-like people. That's another good example. They'll make it insinuating, vague posting kind of thing, but it's obvious what they're pointing to. All of their fans know exactly what they're saying, and they say the extreme, ugly bit out loud. And I mean, they know what they're doing.
We mentioned Eric R. Weinstein, right? And I think we would be remiss to mention that friend of the podcast, Tim Nguyen, the researcher who wrote a kind of critical piece along with the anonymous co-author Thiel, critiquing geometric unity ahead of the release of Eric's official release of it on the Rogan podcast. But in any case, he's released a blog post called Physics Grifters, Eric Weinstein, Sabine Hossenfelder, and the Crisis of Credibility, right? And he's basically talking about his experience dealing with the various people in the alternative physics online sphere, Brian Keating, Eric Weinstein, Sabine, and how they've responded to him producing a technical critique of Eric's paper. And he's talking about things like Eric behind the scenes threatening legal action of podcasts that hosted him, getting appearances nixed on things like the Lex Friedman podcast and also detailing Sabine, originally hosting the critical essay that he produced or the critical paper that he produced and then taking it down. And as she's taken her more like her turn towards anti-physics or anti-science YouTubery. Not entirely anti-physics, but,
their commitment to free speech and robust debate is...
It's called into question. It's called into question by the things that are detailed there. So I will put a link to it in the show notes. But if you want to see, various receipts provided for Eric and Sabine perhaps not being as devoted as they say to, dialogue and hearing out critical voices, that would be the place to go. And on that subject, Matt, Sabine Hossenfelder, she produced some more content and I had a little run-in with her on social media. But one thing is, she produced a Google Doc, which she's written, and it's in the format of like claim and then fact, an assessment of the claim, right? So like the first one is claim, Sabine is a science denier, fact, false. Sabine has a science news show on YouTube. She reports new scientific or technological developments multiple times a week. She has not denied any established science and strives to inspire interest in science technology. So she's made a 6-page document, a Google Doc, right, where she has put various critiques and then responded with fact, right? However, she's used the third person, which is an interesting choice. It's kind of like Matt and Chris have been accused of like being too sarcastic and dismissive. Fact, they are not. Matt and Chris
They're fine. Matt and Chris are fine. Perfectly fine.
They actually use the appropriate tone for all the material that they cover. So I don't know if adopting the third person actually makes it more objective when you've written the assess. But so she posted this up on Twitter, saying, in the past year, some wild rumors have spread about what I have allegedly said. To make it easier for people to check what of that is true, I have put together a brief and hopefully helpful summary. It's quite remarkable to, look, you don't need to go to those, silly critique pieces. Here's my Google Doc in the third person that says that they're all wrong and I'm actually great.
That's very good. I like that. The other place you could go is our coverage, where we helpfully play clips, so there isn't too much debate about what you did.
Whether they said it. Well, yeah. Matt, that's there's such a process as selective clipping, and I believe streamers talk about clip chimping. Fact, Matt and Chris would never do that. Yeah, fact. If you're curious of that, we will make a 3.5-hour exhaustive clipping of an episode. So be careful, right? But yeah, we play a lot of clips to properly contextualize things. But the interesting thing that I saw in response to this was, you remember Kareem Carr, Matt, back in the old Twitter days?
2 + 2 = 5?
Yes, that's Kareem. So he was in those the halcyon days of Twitter of 2 or 3
when
years
the world
ago.
was fresh and young.
Yeah. Where worm discourse was the topic of the day, and people debated whether 2 + 2 = 5 or 4. So Kareem was one of the people arguing that in certain contexts it can equal 5, right? And this caused a fury online and a remarkably stupid discourse for all sides, really. But I saw he responded to this post by Sabine, and he said, "This is a brilliant idea. At a certain level of fame, pushing back on all the lies and misinformation regarding what one said and didn't say becomes a full-time job. I might have to steal this." And Sabine says, "Please do not hesitate. Scattering content over different media makes it admittedly hard for people to figure out what one has actually said." So he endorses this as this is a good way to do it. You just make the document and state, the actual thing, and then your listeners don't need to, go elsewhere. You've got the rebuttals there saying, no, this is wrong. We did make the point, Matt, that, the accusations from Professor Dave, whatever, that Peter Thiel is funding her and whatnot. So claim number 3, Sabine is paid by Peter Thiel. False. Sabine is not paid by Peter Thiel and has never received funding from Peter Thiel, Peter Thiel's companies, or any associated entities. So I don't think Sabine is funded by Peter Thiel, to be clear. But simply someone saying that is not actually evidence counter to it, right? Like, I don't think Professor Dave should make those accusations, but simply putting in a Google Doc, this doesn't happen. It doesn't make it actually true, right? Like, I feel like people understand this, but to be clear, I don't think that you should make those accusations without strong evidence, right? So it's more, I think, the attention ecosystems and the YouTube metrics explain enough of what might be motivating Sabine for her takes.
Indeed.
So she was putting out another thing about the problem with the bad incentives in science and the problem with physics and all this kind of thing, her usual YouTube content. And I made a comment saying, Sabine loves to talk about all the problems of science and the terrible incentives skewing research and scientists' motivations. What I've yet to see her discuss is the incentives that afflict YouTubers, including what kind of videos about science get you more attention. Okay, a cheeky comment, Matt, but in line with, our take on these things. We've criticized Sabine for this in all our content. Sabine responded, "If you find out what works on YouTube, please let us all know that we can get rich. Thank you." So that is what is called in the biz a dunk. In my case, it led to a 10-point list of things that you can do on YouTube to increase your engagement. And they were all themed around what she does.
What she does, of course. That's right. So you took her dunk and you turned it into a layup, didn't you?
I did. And, as is in the nature of social media, my response was liked by a lot of people and retweeted and whatnot because it was a nice dunk, Matt. But she set it up. But I think the things that I pointed out are all stuff that we've commented on, and I think you would agree with. So
Yeah.
I'll
give us the dot point version.
I'll skip ones that were just like mean and intended
Intended to hurt her.
Like number 9 was cultivate desired parasocial attention by liking all flattering comments and ignoring blocking anyone expressing critical opinions. It's true, but I know she does that, right? So like that was the thing. But the ones that were at the top of the list were present yourself as a renegade truth teller, standing up to a corrupt establishment. 2, explain that mainstream sources are lying to you, but your channel will provide the hard truths. 3, implying nefarious sources are trying to censor you. 4, flatter your audience that by following your channel, they are displaying nuance and independent thinking. 5, present all criticism as bad faith. Ideally, also frame it as self-serving efforts to protect funding and your own authority. 6, offer heterodox takes that pander to your audience, right? And I could go on, Matt. There's 10 of them, but you know, you get the
I get the
gist.
I sign off on all of those. Yeah, lean into conspiratorial gut feelings in your audience. That'll do the trick.
I do think this one was good though. 8 was make some soft jabs at targets your audience likes to demonstrate your independence, lack of bias, but reserve your strongest venom for targets they dislike or disapprove of. This is,
that's
you know,
classic,
Tucker Carlson.
Classic Sabine. Classic Sabine.
Yeah. So she didn't respond to that. That's, I think she's at like year 2 of Weinsteinian devolution, right? At that stage, Weinsteins respond to criticism and whatnot, but they learn it's counterproductive because they, you know, just encourages people to pay attention to the critique. So she's not at that stage yet, but give her time.